The story begins with the announcement that the main character's name is Han Seol, and he went to the World Powerlifting Congress at age to lift a barbell weighing tons, setting a new world record. Han Seol gathers his thoughts, gets into a pose, exhales, and abruptly tries to lift a ton barbell, but at the moment when he should have locked on with the bar, a clot bursts in his heart due to overload, and he falls with the barbell unconscious, and drops of blood immediately appear from his nose. Han Seol is plunged into darkness, and while he passes out, his body undergoes changes that give him various abilities. While all he can think about is whether women really prefer muscular men, and whether he gets his protein from a chicken breast before waking up. The giant chickens look at him and peck him, but when he wakes up the chickens that pecked him have run away, and Han Seol wonders where he is, because a moment ago he was pulling a barbell. Because of the confusion, his calm skill is automatically activated. He looks around the place he is in, and all he sees is an endless field and huge chickens. At this point, Han Seol thinks he has fallen into one of the manifestations of hell because he has eaten so much chicken in his life, so all his surroundings are huge chickens. The chickens come closer to Han Seol and start pecking at him, which annoys him, so he hits one of them, forcing the others to retreat. At this point he activates an ability called Hawk, which allows him to see the protein content of the chicken. When he sees that the huge chickens contain pounds of protein, he jumps on them, leaving nothing but bones, having eaten all that protein. He sits down under a tree, but he is bothered by the lack of size, so he goes to the lake and sees that the results of his hard work in his previous life are gone. After seeing his tiny body without muscles, where he was could not matter, all that mattered to him was getting his muscles back, and in order to get his huge body back, he uproots a tree to do squats. After 3 months of training, his efforts were not in vain, but even though he did not get as big as he wanted, he is happy. He's happy that he has more than enough protein, and as he prepares to continue training, a giant monster chicken named Cockatrice shows up, and it wasn't easy to escape because he couldn't take his eyes off the monster's pecs. The system activates, informing him that his opponent has a large amount of protein. And if he can devour the monster, he will receive a rare kill of amazing muscle recovery. Upon hearing this, he decides it is worth risking his life. Charging his skill, the system warns him to deactivate it, but he continues and he surpasses the limit of his muscles, giving him the unique skill of changing his skeleton. His hand grew several times larger, allowing him to strike the hardest blow, killing this huge monster chicken. Later that night while eating, the smell of chicken cooking attracted the attention of 3 ghouls. They wondered which species could defeat Cockatrice. They also came to ask for his protection since he is now the strongest species in the territory. But while the ghouls were talking, Han Seol couldn't stop thinking about their skinny legs, which made him not hear them. When they asked him for a protection favor, he wouldn't listen to them at all, and they gave up after he asked for an explanation for the 10th time. He answers that he can't help them because he must build muscles and will waste time on that, but he does give them a piece of chicken breast. The ghouls thank him and approach the piece of chicken preparing to take it. Seeing this, he gets annoyed and asks them if they want to ruin their backs, and if they even know what a deadlift is. From their confusion, he realizes that they are in bad shape because they do not lift weights. Remembering the wise words of his high school coach, he decides to visit the ghouls in their village the next morning, and during their conversation, he can't stop himself from thinking about the poor physical shape the ghoul is in, and then it comes to talking about skills, and not knowing what a skill is. Han Seol asks to explain, but the ghoul looks down on him for not knowing. The head ghoul is angry that a stranger has been brought to him and invites the 3 who brought him to the village to punish them with his cudgel. The ghoul lord swings his club at his subjects, adding his waiting skill by a factor of 2. Han Seol easily blocks this blow and saves one of his subjects. Thinking that it was an accident, the tough lord is preparing to attack again. Han Seol thought it was a shame to kill someone with such amazing skill, but nothing could be done since he was the enemy. The moment he hit Han Seol, his weapon broke, and in the same instant Han Seol cut the distance, using one hand raised forward. He grabbed the tough lord by the neck. He suggested that the lord hold a contest between them to see who would be the strongest, and then the fate of Han Seol or the Gull Lord would be decided. If the Gull Lord wins, then Han Seol would become his subordinate, and if Han Seol wins, then he would become the new Gull Lord. The first exercise, the bench press, the starting weight was kilograms. The Gull Lord made his first attempt, and using his skill reduced the weight to about a quarter of the original. While warming up, Han Seol asks the other Gulls to pay attention to how he is going to lift the barbell. The Lord Gull uses his skill of quadrupling the weight as Han Seol begins to lift the barbell, but it didn't matter because with a slight movement of his hand, Han Seol sent the barbell into space. Seeing this, the Gulls bowed to Han Seol and appointed him as the new Lord Gull. The previous Lord Gull explained to Han Seol that he was in a new world different from his original world. But there are legends of people returning back to their worlds. He delayed returning until he got his muscles back because if he returned, he would be ridiculed. Han Seol and the former Gull Lord go to the training grounds, and once they arrive, Han Seol is disappointed with the condition of their training grounds. He orders the Gulls to stand in rows of 5, telling them that unless they want to be the weakest, they need to have a strong body, so he will train them for 3 months so they can become warriors. The Gulls realize that's what they need, because now they won't be at the bottom of the food chain, and after they stand in a row of 5, he tells them to do push-ups. 3 hours later, the Gulls are struggling to keep pushing back, but Han Seol has no problem. The former lord informs him that the other Gulls can no longer continue, to which he tells them to do more than they can eat. At this point, the Gulls give up, because then they will do 800 push-ups. Hearing them complain, Han Seol stands up and gives one of the powerful speeches, upon hearing which the Gulls are motivated to continue training for 3 months. So 3 months pass and the Gulls' will and strength grow several times over. 3 months later, the lizard people decided to colonize the Gull village, deciding that this would be their first humanoid settlement. Upon receiving information from the former lord about the attack, Han Seol orders the bench press group to open their chests, breathe, squeeze their cheeks, and finally release stones on the human lizards from a high mountain, which all the Gulls successfully handle. This strike was quite unexpected for the lizards. The lizard men leader notices that his men are about to be destroyed, so he challenges the Lord of the Gulls to a fight where they will meet one-on-one. Remembering how Han Seol possessed his pet crocodile in his original world as a child, he jumps on the lizard, pinning it to the ground under the weight of his body. And using intimidation to force it to surrender, the human lizard briefly twitches and tries to break free, but then admits that it gives up. Next, our story takes us not far from the mines of Ali in the county of Wurdu. The feudal lord orders some of his men to investigate the disappearance of cockatrice, and after receiving the assignment, the 3 men leave. The lord asks his general if these men can accomplish their mission. The general confirms that there is nothing to worry about because those 2 of the 3 men are geniuses. Upon hearing this, the lord brings up why the 3rd man is on the mission. But all she tells him is that the other 2 love him, and since they have been friends since childhood, they became very attached. As their way through the woods, they encounter a pack of goblins whom they had to deal with to protect their friend Wodug because he was not very successful at swordsmanship. After the fight, they check on their friend, and he tells them that everything is fine, but in his mind he is jealous of the fact that his friends are much stronger than him, even though they started training at the same time. In the village, the lizards joined the Gulls in their training, and afterwards they said goodbye. Han Seol was surprised that the Gulls had changed so much in 1 day of rest as they prepared to cook. They asked him if they could go hunting on their own to test the new muscles they had gained, and Han Seol allowed it. Han Seol finally has time to practice on his own, but he finally decides to join them on the hunt, and during the hunt he has the Gulls do lunges to test their posture and improve their calf strength, but one of the Gulls gets hurt. Later that night in the camp of the 3 warriors, Wodug is engaged in secret training alone. wanting to learn how to wield a sword. During this time, his friend Trud has been watching him without his knowledge, and when he comes out of the shadows, he gives him feedback to help him improve. The third friend Hender also emerged from the shadows, and the two began to argue about the sleep schedule. While they were arguing, they noticed the lizardmen running toward them, and the lizardmen were actually running away from the chickens. Han Seol's appearance in this world destroyed the entire ecosystem, where the very top was occupied by our protagonist. Later, they saw chickens training their breasts, and seeing chickens training girls tried to do the same exercise but failed. Through his observation of the chickens, Han Seol realized that the girls were used to his training, so he came up with a solution and told them to gather in rows of 5. After the girls gather in 5 rows, he demonstrates a cable cross exercise that targets the pecs. After training the hands, the girls noticed their underdeveloped pecs, which excited them, causing them to want to pump them. After the chickens evolved, the girls had no chance against them, so the hunt for chickens failed, and the girls lay back, resting after the battle. In the Ghoul village, the ex-lord wakes up and complains about the taste of the food Han Seol cooks. And he shows us how to make delicious chicken skin using his recipe. At this time, the ghouls are perplexed as to why they are still losing to the chickens. But Han Seol explains that it is because they are still losing to the chickens in their training. The chickens have trained all their lives and they have only trained for months. Then Han Seol decides to catch the chickens himself in order to feed his settlement. He grabs the chickens, and the chickens have their whole life flying in their eyes from birth to this moment. That night the village enjoys the chicken for dinner, and in the morning, while they are training, he cooks the chicken. In the morning while they are training, he tells the ghouls to go out hunting alone. As the ghouls hunt, they realize that they have the strength to defeat the chickens, but they don't know how to create the conditions to win the battle. To be continued. Then, using their pectoral muscles, they begin to call out to the other 2 teams who have separated from them to look for the chickens. They begin to move their sad muscles incredibly hard and often, which creates a special sound that the commanders of the 2nd and 3rd teams hear and fly to the rescue in a flash. There are people, chickens, and ghouls in a huge clearing, and in a few seconds the commanders of the 2nd and 3rd teams with their squads come to the rescue from all sides. They realize that they cannot cope with such a number of stakes, which is several times their strength alone, so the ghouls team up and remember what Han Seol taught them. In their heads, an exercise called the bench press flies by, and you have to concentrate all your strength and tighten your arm muscles. The ghouls look at each other happily and realize that they are on the same page. To prevent any of the ghouls from crouching down and not doing this exercise, they stand in a pyramid behind each other to support each link in it. The ghouls approach the hens in order to grab them and tear them in 2, which they do successfully. As they begin to take out the first chickens, the chickens decide to retreat to call for help. After a moment, the forest begins to shake from someone's footsteps, those footsteps so many that the ground falls away from under the feet of all the characters standing in the clearing. Huge chickens come into the clearing, similar in size to cockatrice, but there was neither 1 nor 2 of them, but about 14. The 3 comrades standing in the clearing are incredibly surprised because the size of these chickens is more the size of dinosaurs than the size of cocks. And 1 huge chicken is heading toward our 3 comrades, so they start attacking it. They wave the ball around helplessly, trying to hurt it in some way, but they can't do anything. Han Seol is training for himself at this time, remembering what ghouls were like not long ago, where their main ability was only to whine. But now they have divorced their muscle mass, endurance, and consequently strength, that they can go hunting by themselves. Meanwhile, one of the ghouls does make it to Han Seol to tell him about the huge chickens that have come to the clearing, as the ghouls are unable to cope with them. In order to save his boys, Han Seol without thinking for a second activates the increase of his muscles from his legs several times, crouches incredibly low to the ground and jumps out like a grasshopper in the direction of the battle between the ghouls and the chickens. Until Han Seol arrives on the scene, the ghouls have to fight off the huge chickens. To do this, They use a technique called the last principle, where they line up in a pyramid and exist as a single organism of cells. This technique allows you to feel the combined support of each of the gulls, but the huge-sized chickens are still stronger than them and their techniques. And the chicken accelerates to an incredible speed and crashes into this huge pyramid of gulls. The gulls fall to the ground, falling from a great height, but they have no choice but to believe in what they are doing and to believe in their friends. Moments later, a flying comet appears in the sky and crashes into the ground next to one of the chickens at breakneck speed, leaving nothing behind. Everyone in the clearing thinks that Han Seol has arrived, but in fact it turns out to be the Old Lord in order to protect his servants. This appearance is incredibly surprising to all the gulls. They notice that the Old Lord's behavior has incredibly changed since Han Seol appeared in their settlement. All the gulls think that the Old Lord has some kind of plan, but he only procrastinates until Han Seol appears, yet he still does not appear. At this time, huge chickens begin to surround the Old Lord to tear him apart. Then the Old Lord activates his magic, picks up one of the huge stones, and throws it at one large chicken, because of which he immediately dies. Seeing that the Old Lord continues to resist and defend his servants, the gulls rush into battle to help their lord. At this time, Han Seol arrives, and as soon as he appears in front of the enormous hens, they begin to run away from him because they felt the incredible strength from his pectoral muscles. Nevertheless, he catches up with them and decides to kill them. He strikes two chickens at once with his hands, which causes them to fly several hundred meters into the sky and then land and bang their heads into the ground. Some chickens he just tilts on their backs and throws other chickens on them, which causes all of them to die at once. At this time the chickens are not diminished, they only gain more coming to the scene of the fight. Then Han Seol decides to activate the maximum size of his muscles in order to get rid of all the chickens in one blow. His arms increase to an incredibly huge size, after which he accelerates to unprecedented speed and gets rid of all the chickens in one blow, and the very place of impact becomes like a meteorite funnel. At this time, his gulls Han Seol behind him, supporting him from an incredibly strong blow. They act as a single organism, so the force of the blow was so great, but none of the gulls and people in the clearing nearby were hurt. Han Seol uses all his strength and muscle energy to rid himself of the invasion of a huge number of dinosaur chickens. At this time, Woodaga catches his eye, so he suggests that he start training, which forces him to stay with the gulls without his friends. He thinks briefly and agrees. At this time, two of his comrades decide to go back to their lands, where they personally tell the Count who they met and how he single-handedly defeated a group of cockroaches. The Count realizes that the pumped-up gulls can't be a threat to them. Well, this guy is a huge danger to them. The mentor in front of the Count asks where Woodaga has gone, to which they reply that he has stayed with the gulls and Han Seol to do some unbelievable things. To which the mentor replies that he will not allow his warrior to remain a prisoner, so they are going on a campaign to rescue Woodaga. And Woodaga at this time is at the gulls' training ground, where Han Seol informs them that a new student has come to them, so they will now repeat the whole program starting from the beginning, so they will start with squats. Woodaga has never done squats in his life or seen them done, so Han Seol helps the new student learn how to do squats. He asks him to squat one more time, and then he asks him to raise his hands up so that he can pass the bar to Woodaga. Han Seol passed the bar directly into Woodaga's hands, and ordered him to stand up without breaking his stance, which Woodaga did. From which Han Seol was incredibly surprised, and thought to himself that he had the perfect form for powerlifting. Han Seol informs Woodaga that he has a wonderful talent that could make him much stronger than his friends with their swordsmanship skills. Woodaga is very surprised, because no one has ever told him such a confession before, which makes the carriers begin to want a man's tear. The next day Han Seol decides to learn how to breed chickens inside the settlement, so he brings the chicks right into his arms. To which everyone in the settlement fell incredibly surprised, because why breed chickens when you can hunt them in the woods? Han Seol explains that you can want as much as you want on them, But we don't think about the consequences, because chicken breasts can suddenly run out, and then where to find protein and protein. It's best to think about this in advance, so let's try to breed chickens in our settlement. After the successful construction of the chicken pen, everyone moves to the training area, where Woodaga decides to continue lifting the barbell, which the Old Lord helps him to do. The Old Lord uses his magic to help him lift the barbell and makes it heavier depending on the right moment in the exercise. At this time, a mentor and two of Woodug's friends appear on the horizon with a small army, where the mentor declares that she has come to rescue her fighter Woodug, who at this time is doing exercises with a barbell. With a swing of her ball, she strikes the ground, causing the ground to crumble and a small crevice to appear. The mentor quickly runs up to the Old Lord and asks him if he left her warrior captive, to which he replies that it was not his doing. Then the mentor swings the ball and wants to hit the Old Lord. But in front of her suddenly appears as if from the ground Han Seol, putting his hand under her sword and protecting the Old Lord. He asks her why the hell she's bothering them while they're training, to which she tells him that Woodug already had his own mentor coach and he poached him. But Woodug didn't tell Han Seol about it before, so he has to deal with it right now. Woodug admitted that he switched to a new coach because he liked training with him more than fencing. He apologizes to his mentor because he has a new coach. Well, the mentor is not at all comforted by this. She thinks it is necessary to find out by fighting who is the best trainer and mentor for him. Between the mentor and Han Seol begins an incredible battle, where one has excellent swordsmanship, and the other has tremendous muscle mass and the ability to increase and decrease the necessary muscles. While the fight was going on and the two mentors were figuring out who was better, two of Woodug's friends came up to him and asked him to explain what he had been doing these days. He explained that he had been training and decided to show them what they looked like. First he decided to show squats on the first one, then they worked the barbell, all while the two mentors were fighting for the title of best. The mentor noticed from the corner of her eye that her students were doing something obscure that they had never done before, and decided to stop the fight between her and Han Seol because she saw the pleasure in her students' eyes and the joy of the exercises they had done. Han Seol explained that training is not a waste of time, it is a process that allows you to better understand yourself and reach new opportunities not only physically, but also spiritually. Once the mentor realized how important training was, she decided to leave her guys with him so I wouldn't have to learn something new. She asked him why he was doing it for free, that is why he was training so many people for nothing, to which he told her that the more people involved in the sport and in training accordingly, the better for everyone. Then the mentor decides to leave the goal settlement, leave her boys there to continue training with Han Seol, and once they reach a new level for themselves, they can safely return to their county. Woodug turns to Han Seol and informs him that discrimination is rampant in the county of Wurdo where he lives, and it not only affects species different from humans, but it also affects magic and other religions and so on. In other words, in this county not just humans, but swordsmen rule over everyone. He goes on and reports that young people like him certainly do less of this kind of discrimination. But he's still worried about how his fellow stooges will not be affected by sharp statements and actions if Han Seol decides to go to Wurdo County. At this time, Han Seol notices that the retinue, which arrived with his mentor Bland horses, and the horses during the parking lot can barely eat oats. He remembers that oats are one of the main and disease of their carbohydrates, which he lacks here, so they take oats right with the horses. At the same time, the Old Lord decides to prepare a dish from the provisions possessed by the mentor's squad, in the course of which he gets an incredibly delicious dish from which both the mentor and her squad come to a complete delight, calling his dish a culinary wonder. At this time, Han Seol approaches the mentor and says that it would still be nice if he trained for something in return for her guys. The mentor says that he can ask for almost anything he wants, whereupon our protagonist informs her that he needs oats. The mentor is perplexed, assuming that these oats will go to eat the chickens, but Han Seol informs her that they will eat the oats themselves. Mentor says she can ask her for more than just plain oats, like ammunition for the goals, or to change their weather tents to portable wooden houses. But Han Seol explains that eating protein alone will cause the body to fail sooner or later, which has an incredibly bad effect on the liver. But at the same time, if you eat enough carbohydrates, the body can release glycogen, which helps to get even more power. So oats, which contain various carbohydrates, allows the absorption process to be slower, which allows the feeling of fullness to remain longer.